it going?
Hey Anna, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Well, I'm Anna,
I'm Marcie.
and today we are going to be talking a little bit about emotional hunger. Um, Before we dive in, we did want to give a little bit of a disclaimer that emotional hunger and emotional eating is a really big and charged topic. And so we're trying to approach this in kind of the most like nuanced way possible. And we understand that this is not a replacement for individual care and individual counseling with providers. Everyone has their own kind of emotional relationship with food. So hopefully we can help start a conversation around this and help like reduce some of the stigma around emotional eating. But Marcie and I were kind of having a hard time even like narrowing down what we wanted to talk about today. So Marcie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, well, I just think this could easily have turned into like a 3 hour video because we were like, oh, we should add this and this. And so it's very, very nuanced. And yeah,
Totally.
I think it's just a good jumping off point.
Yeah.
And then just to, yeah, work with your own providers on really exploring what this topic, what emotional eating means to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're excited to talk about it today, though.
Yeah. Well, Marcie, do you want to start us off with telling us a little bit about what emotional hunger is?
Yeah. So in another video, Anna and I talked about like physical hunger, logical hunger. And so now we're talking about emotional hunger and emotional eating. And this emotional hunger, in my mind, is like anything connected to, eating for comfort or, that taste hunger stimulation or wanting to connect with like familiar foods, nostalgic foods, wanting comfort. And so yeah, we're going to dive into a lot of that, but I think that's kind of the quick and easy answer. I don't know if you want to add anything to that on
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I think you got it. I think a lot of times when I think about emotional hunger, I'm thinking about like ways that hunger is tied to emotions, right? Or like ways that we like eat for reasons other than just kind of like physiological need to eat or like
Yeah.
physical hunger, right? So I think a lot of times like um a stereotype that might come up is like, like eating when you're sad and like soothing that. But I think a lot of times I also think about like ways that emotions and eating are tied to like celebrations, right? So like um eating when you're celebrating or like eating when you're like overjoyed, right? Like things like that where it's like there's so many emotional ties to eating and so many reasons to eat that are not just like physical hunger, logical hunger, etc.
Yeah. It's actually, as you're saying that, like I'm going to my hometown this week and I'm already planning, these are the restaurants I want to go to. This is the coffee shop I
Totally.
want to go to. It's like, what do I want to have? What do I want my mom to make?
Yeah.
Um, so it just shows up in so many aspects of her life. Or like, oh, I want a dessert after dinner. Or, this kind of concept right now of like sweet treat culture, which like, we can have desserts at any time. It doesn't have to be a treat, but like that is also emotional hunger, taste hunger. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think it definitely shows up in all of these different ways on a regular basis. That's very normal.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I want to do a little bit of like myth busting
Yeah.
around emotional hunger. Emotional hunger gets a pretty bad rap, and I wonder if you want to start talking about that a little bit and then I can kind of jump in as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think about it a lot in terms of diet culture. Like a lot of the messaging we get is only when you're hungry and, you can't listen to your body or you can't trust your cravings. And so, maybe we do have these very normal cravings for a certain food, but then because of how the world is or how our diet culture is, like we're trying to avoid that or kind of shove those cravings away or avoid these really fun familiar cultural foods. But what can end up happening is like if there's physical restriction or mental restriction around these foods, we tend to want them more, so it's kind of like we might end up having more of those foods than we might have originally if we had just listened to our bodies. And so I think diet culture as a whole gives it a really bad reputation of like we can't trust our cravings or we can't trust this emotional part of our hunger.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like something that comes to my mind is like also just optimization culture, which like, we're using
Yes,
diet culture, optimization culture. It's
yes,
all the same thing, but just like said in different ways. But like this idea of
yeah,
like you only eat for fuel and like you are only supposed
yes,
to eat to like make yourself a more like efficient being or like a more like
yes,
optimal kind of like in my mind like optimal like worker or something like that, like that kind of thing. And
yeah,
so
so functional.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that yeah, again like maybe I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's like there are so many reasons to eat that are not just to like fuel a specific purpose, right? Like that it's
Yes,
super normal to have like an emotional relationship with food and a cultural relationship with food. And, like you were saying with like this like deprivation cycle, I think a lot of times it's interesting how like that can build a little bit of like a narrative around certain foods, right? Like this idea of like if I'm only eating for like optimization, and if that means that a lot of times I am restricting certain foods that I feel like joy when I'm eating or soothing when I'm eating, like an emotional connection to, because like that is not like optimized or like anything like that, then how a lot of times, like when a person maybe is experiencing like heightened emotions, that can kind of become like the permission to eat these like what have
mm-hmm.
turned into maybe like special foods or like whatever, like that kind of thing, that then leads them to, yeah, maybe engage with it in like a more extreme way than they would if like every once in a while they were like letting themselves engage with these foods or like on a regular
Right.
basis. I said every once in a while, what I mean is like on a regular basis, honoring
Yeah.
these cues. Um, and that can then lead to like, oh man, I'm like really upset. And like now I really get access to this. And then it's kind of like now or never, this is when I'm soothing, etc. And
Yes.
how that can create this narrative of like, oh, well, like, yeah, eating to soothe is bad. Like when I eat and I'm emotional, like this is what happens, or like when I eat to soothe my emotions, like this is what happens. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
that's what comes to mind for me when it comes to like the stigma around emotional eating and like eating to soothe or eating for emotional purposes.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think with the stigma, it then can lead people to do this in secret. So, like, they want these foods or they're having strong cravings, but they feel maybe guilt and shame about having that, or they don't want their partner or family to see. So, maybe they'll have these foods in secret, but then this just like compounds on these negative feelings and associations. And I feel like it can just be this really hard cycle to get out of.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
another way the stigma kind of harms that trust with the body and like emotional hunger.
Yeah, it feels like we're like creating like layers of like emotions to it, right? Because it's like, okay, I have emotional relationship with food, and then I have an emotional
Right.
relationship with the fact that I have an emotional relationship with food.
Yes.
I feel like you end up having almost like a reaction to the reaction to the reaction versus just being like, okay, I'm eating to soothe, or like I'm eating like allowing that to just be the reality versus like making a bunch of meaning of like what does it mean that I ate for an emotional reason?
Yeah, it's like how do we normalize it? And I think that can lead us into talking about emotional eating as a coping strategy or mechanism. So I don't know, Anna, if you want to start off talking about that a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. So when I think about emotional eating as a coping strategy, yeah, it's hard not to have like the first thought be like the stigma that gets placed around like eating for emotional reasons,
Yeah.
which I know that we like touched on a little bit. I feel like to me it's interesting because again, like eating to soothe or eating for emotional reasons is really normal and can be a helpful like method of coping. I think where I get kind of curious with people when I'm working with them, and there's maybe like a theme of like eating when I'm emotional or like using food to like soothe emotionally, etc. Um, I get interested in the fact or in whether is this the only tool that you have in your toolbox to kind of like address your emotions, right? So like when there's an emotional experience that you're having, are you always turning to food? Do
Right.
you have these other like coping skills that you can also use? Which it feels important to say that like for us to determine whether or not there is like emotional eating going on, you have to be meeting biological needs, right? So
100%.
this conversation looks really different with someone who is, eating really regularly throughout the day. And then, when they're having an emotional trigger or an emotional experience, it's always turning to food versus someone who's like, I have not eaten all day. I had a really strong emotion and that led me to eat, where I'm like,
Yeah.
now it's a little bit more complicated because there is also like a physiological reason that you are eating at the
Yeah.
time, you know? So just want to give that caveat. But yeah, I think I get interested in like, do you have other tools in your toolbox, other
Yeah.
forms of coping is like kind
Yeah.
of layer number one. And then layer number two, are you eating and it's a soothing experience, and it's allowing you to tolerate being with the emotion? Or are you
Mhm.
eating and it's a numbing experience and it is completely taking you out of the emotion and it's now kind of becoming more of like a tool for avoidance, is kind of like
Yeah.
about.
I think that's a really helpful way to think about it. And I kind of think about like eating as a coping strategy on a spectrum, like on maybe the lighter end, it feels supportive, or like you were saying, it helps us sit with that emotion. And maybe we're still able to check in with how our body's feeling and responding to that food. But if we get on the other side of the spectrum, like maybe there is more of that numbing, it's like, oh, maybe we're feeling really sick or like physically uncomfortable after. So I think that's where we can support clients, or someone can kind of check in on this for themselves of how is their body feeling, and um, how are those symptoms. The other thing I was going to say about kind of the toolbox for coping skills, like I know we all kind of practice, like if emotional eating is the only coping skill someone has, we don't want to be like, okay, just stop doing that. It's like we want to fill up that toolkit with all of these other skills, and then over time we hope that in a stressful or emotional situation, we're grabbing different tools at different times. Eating is still in there. It's not like, oh, we're trying to get rid of that, but we just want other tools to choose from.
Totally. You're kind of like diversifying your portfolio of like
So
coping
to
skills.
say,
No?
yes, you want to diversify the portfolio
Yes,
100%.
exactly. Exactly. Um,
Yeah.
well, I wonder, is there anything else we wanted to say about like emotional eating as like a coping strategy or anything like that?
I I think like for people, if they're exploring this for themselves or with their team, easier said than done, but just trying to be like curious with what's going on and like compassionate with yourself, because I think there can be, like we were saying, so much stigma and judgment around it. So like just trying to be kind to yourself if you're someone that's working on this or wanting to explore this. Yeah, anything else you would add, Anna?
No, I mean, I think that's like the best foot to like land on at the end of it is this idea
Yeah, yeah,
that we are not robots, right? So like we don't just need to like charge ourselves to function or like we don't just need like gas in the tank to go. Like yes, gas in the tank is a really important function of food. And we have like
yeah,
reached a cultural point, at least in like Western culture, where it's like a lot of us experience the privilege of being able to eat for reasons other than just the need to fuel, and that like
yeah.
this is a really wonderful human experience that not everyone has to experience, right? So like there are people who maybe like don't
Right.
have emotional connection to food for any number of reasons,
Totally.
right? But
Yep.
that like if that is something that you experience, it is such a like I don't know, like wonderful and like vulnerable aspect of like humanity that has unfortunately been really stigmatized, but that I think can actually end up being a really cool side of like your relationship with food to explore in sessions.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm.
And now I have a question for you. What is one of your like comfort foods?
Yeah. So whenever I eat for like comfort specifically, I mean, I have some maybe like specific meals, like, like my mom makes what's called like caldo de pollo, which is just like chicken soup, um, which like is a big like eating to soothe thing for me. Especially like if I'm sick or something like that, I'm like, that will heal me.
Yeah.
But actually from like more of like a sensory like I'm a really big like sensory person. And a lot of times like when I'm eating to soothe, I seek like a spicy sensory experience. So I'm kind of like a hot Cheeto or like things with like a lot of like hot sauce or like, salsa, whatever in them. I'm like a huge fan of like if you've ever done this, it's like a medley of like um the queso ruffles, Flamin' Hot Cheetos, and then the limon like Lay's, and then you do a bunch
Mm.
of like lime in them, and then you do like some like Valentina like and chamoy hot sauce, and you just like mix it all together. And that is a really good like first of all nostalgic, but also like good like sensory stimulus. Oh no, we're back.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you were saying like sensory
Yes,
snack.
sensory stimulation. Yeah, what about you, Marcy? What's your answer?
Okay, well, I'm thinking on the sensory stimulation. I really like sour. So, like some sour, really sour, like gummy candy. Like, if I'm wanting something more like of a pop, that would be really good. But definitely, like, my go to comfort meal um, is P. Terry's. If you're not in Austin, it's a local burger chain, but like their veggie burger with fries and a chocolate milkshake, just like so good. I feel like anytime it's been a rough day, I'm like, I got to get some P. Terry's and just feels so comforting and enjoyable. So that's my answer right now, but sure it'll change, always
Yeah.
changes.
Well, and I feel like, not to be like everything we missed, because like I'm sure there's a million things we could add to this, but just, me talking about the spicy aspect, you talking about the sour aspect, I think something we didn't
Yeah.
touch on as much on is like this idea of like a lot of times, even if you don't have such like an emotional relationship with food, right? Of like, oh, I'm eating to soothe because this is nostalgic or whatever it might be, there are a lot of people who experience just like a lot of like sensory soothing from, yeah, like sour candy or like something that's cold, right? So like I'm thinking about like your milkshake,
Yes.
like the spicy foods, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like that can be kind of like a form of like stimulation that is especially helpful for individuals who experience like neurodivergence and everything. So just wanted to add that little bit in before we finish.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that and something we could definitely expand upon. But for the sake of time, I think we'll leave it there. But it was I know I'm like we could just keep going forever, but
Literally.
it was really fun getting to talk about this, and maybe we'll do more like videos on it in the future.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we can wrap up here. And, if anyone has any questions about what we talked about today, you can always leave a comment on the YouTube video with like requests for us to maybe expound upon any of the things that we kind of lightly touched on today. But thanks so much for meeting with me, Marcy.
Good to see you, Anna. Thanks for watching, y'all. See you next
Bye,
time.
y'all. See you next time.